Well, hello again, and welcome to another edition of God's Creative Connection, an unscripted show. My name is Pastor Matt West, and I am joined once again by my colleagues, Pastor Kim Metzer and Pastor Jackie Ranieri. And we are so glad to have this opportunity to come and share with you once again in this final week of this series. And today we'll be taking a look at the scripture passage from Genesis, chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. And this week I'm going to ask Pastor Jackie if she would give us a short synopsis of what this week's passage is about, just to remind our viewers.
All right, thanks. I'd love to, but I want to read the beginning of it because I love the beginning of it. Okay, so this is chapter 22, and this is verses 1 through 14, but I won't read them all, but it starts off with saying, sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. And Abraham says, here I am. Hey. That just cracks me up. Here I am. Here I am. Love this. And then God says, take your son, your only son, which I think is an interesting thing. Mm-hmm. Take your only son and take him to the mountain, and gives them the direction, tells them what to do, gives them the tools, and says, here's what you need to take with you, and then offer him as a burnt offering. So they set out, and Abraham listens, gathers up Isaac, and takes him on up this mountain, and he binds him up. I guess that's the right word. Binds him up and gets him up there on the altar and gets ready to sacrifice him. And God says, no, wait a minute. And then take the ram instead. And that's where we're all of a sudden, Abraham listened. Abraham obeyed and paid attention and listened to what, and didn't fight once to say, like, why my son?
Now, of course, I found it just as humorous as you reading the first couple of verses, but I think at this point, Abraham's had enough conversations with God that it's like there wouldn't be the hesitation, but to us reading it, it's like he didn't bother to look and see if it was somebody around. It was like, yep, here I am.
Here I am. It reminds me of that song, Here I Am. Or,
it's like, sorry.
So we get past the chuckles of the first two verses. So then as Pastor Jackie shares, God starts giving him orders on, like, where to take his son and what to take with him or what. That to me seems like the more odd part of the beginning of this passage. Like, at that point, even if you're the father of faith, wouldn't you be like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Right. Well, plus his son, his only son. Whoa. What about Ishmael?
I know, that's why I stopped there, because I'm like, I like how that, and that was the NIV version of it, and that's what I was looking to see.
Talking legitimate or illegitimate?
That's a good way to put it that way. You're right.
Because in the New International Version, it reads, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region, of Moriah. So
that's similar to NRSV.
NRSV says it.
So yes, we know about the other child, which we talked about last week, but now it's like, well, this, God was awful specific because, well, look at it this way too. This was the one that God promised Abraham and Sarah.
That's true.
Right.
This was the promise, son.
Right. Not the one that they got through shenanigans, but
darn shenanigans.
All shenanigans.
And in my notes in the NRSV Wesley Study Bible, they're saying that God had three imperatives: take, go, offer. And the take, he was very specific. A, your son. B, your only son, whom you love. And C, Isaac. He makes it impossible to misunderstand or redirect the command. And I'm reading that thinking,
I like that.
Wouldn't he do that today? Wouldn't that be great if he did that today and make it impossible to misunderstand? In
Yeah.
all the ways that the Bible is interpreted these days, wouldn't it be great if there was just one way? Well, maybe not. I don't know. It just seems like sometimes it would be nice to have some specific directions.
Right. Well, and the one thing when I always read through like the stories of Genesis that I think about is in regard to Abraham, and yes, he's referred to as the father of faith, but it's like just how incredible his faith is. Like never a question.
Right.
Just, yep, God said this and I go. Where it's like we think about people today that just struggle with the idea of following God just to enter into relationship.
Right.
And here we have this incredible story, and many throughout the Bible is those of us that read it and know it, and whatnot, that like just it astounds me to think about like how much we stumble with our faith, but yet there are these examples repeatedly in the Bible of like God spoke and they went.
Right.
Sometimes they might have questioned a little bit, but for the most part, it was like, if God said it, then I'm going, or I'm
Right.
doing whatever it is that's asked of me.
But I when you said that, I just kind of thought, just popped in my mind there, Matt, that, does he not question because it's like, okay, look what happened when I had the promise and you jumped ahead and we have this other son and then look at the chaos it caused and the pain that it caused. I'm just going to shut up and let God, and take, is that maybe what he was thinking at that point? Because like he said, here we are again, he jumps in, here I am, I'm ready. Tell me what to do next.
I'm just doing it.
Yep.
But I think it's not only the faith, but the trust. I mean, I think those, they can go hand in hand, but it's like Abraham trusted God. He didn't always understand. And, like in last week's, story, with Hagar, it's like he didn't speak up when he could have, but he trusted in God so much that it was like, okay, I don't understand why he's asking me to take my son and this stuff to offer a sacrifice, and we're not taking anything else. We're not taking any animals.
Right.
So it's like, okay, but I
he
trust
has
you,
to
God.
know too that God was still with Ishmael, because Ishmael thrived and he got married and was raised well, and that was because God remained with him. So I'd like to believe that Abraham knew that and knew that God wouldn't desert him either with Isaac. So yeah.
Well, and then what about the fact that Abraham asked those that went with him to be like, well, you stay here with the donkey and we're going to go the rest of the way. To me it's like, well, maybe he's not so comfortable with this, or it's like he doesn't want his servants that went with him to see what's about to happen. Even though Abraham's trusting God, it's like, well, just in case this goes bad.
Fear there, yeah.
It's certainly, this passage brings up a lot of questions. I mean, we could probably rattle off a bunch of them. And Reverend Lewis, who wrote this series that we're working off of, just it was not a lot of answers, but a lot of questions.
Yeah, brought up some more questions.
Yes.
I mean, what were some things that stood out to you, Pastor Jackie, that made you kind of raise up some questions? I mean, was there anything in particular?
Well, some things that I underlined through this commentary that she wrote, and I think Kim mentioned it when we had the discussion before we started recording, but it was like the part when she says, the story as it is told also raises Jacqueline Lewis writes, raises my awareness that the God of Abraham has some vulnerability.
Right.
And it's just like I never thought of, because that stuck to me, and it was like I never thought of God in that way. And it's like, I would love to sit and talk with her during a time like this, what made you think that, or where are you finding that? Because I went to go, I used my interpreter and I was looking through there and I didn't see a comparison to that. But I just wonder, like, what does she mean by God being vulnerable? And it just,
Yeah, that's
You got any thoughts, Pastor Kim, on that?
no, because I also noted that, and the question I wrote down was God has vulnerability, and I don't know if maybe she didn't mean it that way.
well, she goes on to say then, she says, this story shows God making a request that puts God's trustworthiness on the line. Can Abraham trust a God who asked such a thing of him? And then she asks, can we?
Can we?
Yes. And, think back on your own lives and things that have happened in your lives or instances. And it's like when you go back to look at it, it's like, gosh, God was there all the time.
Right.
And I share that, like, even when, I thought I didn't know what I was being called into back when, I thought I was supposed to be a youth director, and I shared the story with you guys several times. And then, as I jumped through all the hoops and grabbed all the carrots, it was like, oh, I'm sorry, we realize you're a woman and you can't do this job. And I was angry, I was angry at God. It's like, why did I go through all of this for you just to say no?
Right.
But as I've grown and matured in my ways and my relationship with God, I understand now it's more that I still needed a lot to learn. I still needed to get my feet wet. I still needed to step on some more stones, and I still need to listen. And, because God obviously had a better plan for me than being a junior high youth director,
You're probably thinking to yourself, like, I left the world of hospitality and meeting people like Loverboy.
That's right. Like, let's don't forget him now.
Oh, I don't know that I heard the Tom Selleck story, but that's for another time.
Another one, but
so I think a question that certainly comes up for myself is like, what's the purpose here? Like, with what God's asking, for what purpose? Like, what does it serve by killing Isaac?
And it doesn't, because Isaac isn't killed. It's a test of both God and Abraham. It's a test of Abraham's faith and of God's keeping God's promises.
Right.
So that makes me that sparked a thought, and I might be off track here, but like maybe there's that vulnerability part is God, not being sure how far Abraham would take this. Like, would he actually do what he was asking? And then to the point to see that Abraham was about ready to do it, that no. Like maybe that was God's vulnerability, was like not really being sure. Like God asked Abraham to do this, but then like how far will Abraham go? Like how much does he trust me?
Well, then there goes that whole theological point that you've talked about a few weeks ago about, God knows it all. I mean, God knows what happens ahead of time. So that's where that comes into play too, in my thoughts of like, okay, if God knows the outcome of this, was that not part of the plan for Abraham to follow through all this way? Going back to what you're saying. But God knows. I mean,
right.
Well, but then you get into arguments
or predestination.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I was thinking. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because obviously, does he know every detail, or does he, put the pieces in place where then we have to complete the puzzle, or like free will offers that opportunity, kind of like choose your own adventure. Like, you can go this way or you can go that way, and then God's ready for either one that you pick. But
God knows what you're gonna pick. But does that mean that it's destined? Or
why there's more questions this week than answers.
Right. Heck of a week to end up with, truly.
It's like, wow.
Guys, we're offering you all kinds of questions and no answers. Figure it out.
But I think that's good, because it gets you thinking. And, what do you believe? How do we read these stories so many times. We, we preached on these, so many times. And, think about Sunday school class or youth group or that. I mean, we heard these stories, but we always looked at it as a different angle. And I think we look at it in our maturity, our spiritual maturity, we've always looked at it at different angles. I mean, I never would have thought of some of these things. I've never really picked out before, like your son Isaac, your only son. I mean, those are things like, that's never been brought to our attention. And, I just remember building the little fire thing with, toothpicks or whatever, and then doing a paper Isaac, laying him up there, and then making the ram come out, and there goes Isaac, there goes the ram. That's where, my teachings were at, hands-on type stuff. But I never, diving in this deep. I mean, it's a deep passage, really. It's just,
it really is.
But it doesn't have a lot of answers for us. And it's just, I think it's one of those that we just need to take what we can from it and grow from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then who knows, maybe 10 years later, maybe we can sit down and have this conversation again, see what
I think we should. Maybe in person. That would be fantastic.
That's right.
Well, and I think in some ways, I mean, we're kind of like Abraham in the fact that, a lot of times we take this story at face value. We know it for what we've been told as children or where it's like, okay, Abraham went to go sacrifice his son and thank the Lord,
there's a ram.
And we're just like, okay. And like Abraham, we're not quite sure why this is happening, but we accept it, and that's part of the deal. Mm-hmm. And, we move on. But to actually, as you were saying, Jackie, to take the time and look at it, we're sitting here going, wait a minute, like an onion, there's a lot more layers to this that if we keep peeling, we're going to keep finding something.
Right.
And in my study Bible, the life application topic for this section is obedience and sacrifice. And a couple of lines in that stuck out to me. In the end, Abraham learns that God does not actually desire Isaac. Rather, God desires confirmation of Abraham's loyalty. And then towards the end, it says, can we love God above everything else? Really? And in so doing, can we learn what God does and does not require of our relationship? God remains faithful. Do we? Do we? God always does.
Right. And I think in a lot of times we like to think we do.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure I do. But then when the going gets tough, or if it's not happening fast enough for us, I think we're just like Abraham and Sarah, and we try to make the plan happen.
Right.
And the outcome that we want to have happen, not God's outcome. So we get in the way too much.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Step aside, people. Let God lead the way.
Well, and, Reverend Lewis, I noticed in the summary, brings up this thought where it's like, she thinks she also thinks that there's space here to ask what it means to follow God without question. Because if we tend to, as we do as human beings, let society kind of influence our thoughts, our immediate thought if somebody asked us to kill one of our own children would be like, oh no.
No.
But what if God asked you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you, it's that test of faith where it's like, do you trust God enough? You say you believe in God, that you'll follow God, but if push came to shove, what this story talks about what it means to follow God without question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Abraham is here with the knife, like ready,
mm-hmm.
And
right.
then God's like, okay, that's good enough for me. Stop. Whoa.
I always thought it was, I don't know, and I guess I'm thinking now is like, you never, I know like in Sunday school, we, coloring the pages and that, like Abraham showed no emotion. If we, how would we be feeling if we were following God? Won't you be like devastated or yeah.
Right.
I know I'd be crying. I would be, like some emotion. And it's like, we're not told any of that.
No.
And of course our Sunday school classes and that are going to give you that, we're going up the mountain, kind of looking, everybody's got a big smile on their face.
Come on, son, we're going camping.
And that's kind of that thing that just kind of just, and maybe to that as well, that kind of, that smile, even when we're little, to seeing that's how faithful Abraham is. That's how much he, is going to obey God. And, maybe
Well,
not.
and I wonder too if, like, out of Abraham's faith and trust in God, if some of his responses too in the many stories through Genesis involving Abraham, if there was, like, on his part, that feeling of obligation, like God made this tremendous covenant with Abraham.
Right.
And, and God might be like, okay, periodically we're going to throw some tests just to make sure you're still in line. But if Abraham's just like, okay, I trust God enough that he's going to fulfill this covenant that he made with me, that, like, I'm going to have all these descendants and everything, that maybe part of it is like, not only do I trust God, but I feel obligated to follow what God's asking of me.
And he does say that in here. Because as they're on their way up, they have Isaac questions it. And Isaac says, the fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, God himself will provide a lamb for a burnt offering, my son.
The ding-ding lights coming on for Isaac going, wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
You and me.
Got the fire and the wood.
Something adding up here, Dad.
And that's,
Well, it is intriguing to dive into this passage a little bit more. And, it's wonderful to have these questions because it leads to such rich conversation like we're having here today.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly something to encourage, those that are watching as well as those in our congregations to be like, these are the kind of talks we should be having. Don't just, it's not that we're questioning God, but it's like to have questions about these stories so we understand better. And that's what I think the three of us came together to do during this series, was to offer that opportunity to go a little bit deeper than our messages and get people, excited about having these conversations. Because as we mentioned, through our Sunday school lessons or whatever, we just kind of took the story at face value.
Right.
And there's so much more to it.
So much more. So many questions.
A lot more than what I thought.
Now let me ask the two of you this. We kind of chuckled early on by Abraham's response, but then if we go later into the story, verse 11, when God goes to stop him, he says, Abraham, Abraham. And again, what's his response?
Here I am.
Here I am.
Yep.
Like, boom, here I am. Okay, yep.
Listening.
I'm right.
So, I
hear
do
you,
you see, I guess, like, is there a deeper thought or connection to that? Like, I don't know, why is that his response?
It's like when attendance is being taken in a class here, or at the start of these devotional videos, and you introduce us. We wave. Here we are. And so that's Abraham saying, I'm listening.
Right.
That's acknowledging God. I'm present.
Well, that's a good thought. Jackie, you had something you want to say?
No, I was just, looking a little bit more into this, what Jacqueline Lewis had to say. And, Abraham says, Abraham obeys God because Abraham trusts God.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I'm thinking maybe the response is, like, hey, I'm here, don't forget about me, I trust you that much. I know you're going to be here and I'm right here with you. And it's like, to me, it's kind of like, is that a response that, here I am. And, just don't forget, I'm right here too. I'm right with you on that. So I don't know. It's just, but that's, I think, is great about this passage is, in this time that we're going deeper in that we don't have to have the answers. Too many times we do these studies and we dig deeper and we beat ourselves up like, oh my gosh, I got to walk away knowing all the answers, and I got to know this, and we're the leaders of the church, and that's not, I don't think, the case of it. I don't think God expects us to have all the answers.
Mhm.
Well, I think there's a component here too, as much as we've talked about Abraham's faith, but just Abraham listening.
Mm-hmm.
How often as part of our stumble do we God's trying to talk to us, but we're not hearing it.
Mhm.
And so that response of "here I am" is I'm listening. It's not just that Kim's analogy of attendance, but it's I'm listening to God. Here I am.
Mm-hmm.
And we, oh my gosh, I wish God would say something to me. And it's well, how do you know that God isn't?
Right.
For us as pastors, and you made reference to the hymn, that was the hymn that I answered my call to ministry to.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am, Lord. So I mean, it gets me right in the feels every time I
felt it. Yep.
And so it's I get that, but I think it's that I guess for me, I'm making that connection of I'm listening.
Right. It reminds me of that story, and I'm sure you've all heard it, that the guy is at the pearly gates and he says to Peter, what happened? I was counting on God to be there, to rescue me. And Peter's like, well, he sent a boat, he sent a helicopter, and he said, all these things, and you just didn't get in there. So, it's that obeying, and, God's going to come to us in different ways, in many ways. And, maybe it is in a ram, maybe it is just someone to start talking to, and you realize there's a connection there of some, somehow. So,
well, this series is God's creative connection.
Yes.
So,
and I love how Reverend Lewis titles this week, "God will provide," with a question mark.
So
God will provide?
Isaac or the ram?
Right.
It's I'm envisioning two different pastors, and one being "God will provide," and the other one being "God will provide." I guess we'll see. So as we begin to wrap up this discussion and this final week of God's creative connection, we want to move into some final thoughts. And so I will share just that not only is this story about Abraham's final test of faith, but also it might be looked at as a test of Abraham's imagination. Just imagining what it is that God will provide for him and his son. So it's certainly, as we've tried to chip away at a story with many layers that brings up many questions, which is okay and allows us to continue the conversation beyond this discussion that I'm having with my colleagues. And I'm so appreciative to have this opportunity to share again with them. But I want to offer them the opportunity too to share their final thoughts. And so, Pastor Kim, I'm going to go ahead and let you go first there and take us home.
Well, just real short for this week. In a recent prayer meeting, a parishioner had thrown out this saying, quote, I'm not sure where she heard it, but I think it really wraps it up. Where God leads, God provides. And I thought that was really great. And I need to print that out and keep that in front of me. Where God leads, God provides.
Amen. Yeah.
Without a question mark.
Yeah, I like that.
Pastor Jackie, anything you'd like to share with us before we wrap it up?
Just shortly, just a short thing that, no matter what through this, we need to be listening, and we need to take that time to take those deep breaths and just quiet ourselves and listen to what God's really saying to us. And, and I think that's the true thing is, we may think we're hearing one thing, but maybe it's something else. And we just need to make sure the direction we're moving in is God's direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I hope that those of you that have been watching with us throughout this series have enjoyed what we've brought to the table and offered up as some just some more food for thought. And again, I thank Pastor Jackie and Pastor Kim for the opportunity to collaborate again. It's been awesome, and it's always fun. And just that is just, I think, an example for our congregations about what it is to work together. We don't have to figure it out all on our own, and we don't have to do it on our own, but together we can certainly make leaps and bounds and be the church, and so that way everybody can see Christ in all of us.
Amen, brother.
Yes.
Yeah. So we appreciate everybody who has watched during this series, God's Creative Connection, and we hope you've enjoyed this. And it won't be the last time you see the three of us together. I will give you fair warning. This is not the last time. But we just hope that you've enjoyed this time together. And when we do meet again, may God be with us and lead us in all that we do. And God bless and peace be with you.
Amen.
Amen.
Woo!
Woo!